Now, I would like to introduce our second speaker for the day, Ms. Divya Marceline. Ma'am is a clinical psychologist with over 6 years of experience in this field. She has an experience of working as a lecturer at SRM University and is currently working as a clinical psychologist at Sri Ramchandra Medical College, Porur. She is also a consultant clinical psychologist at WOW. Apart from her clinical expertise, she has worked and presented 8 research papers, presented posters, and has also published 3 journals. She has equipped herself with numerous additional certificate courses like psychological fieldwork training at the Southern Railway Headquarters Hospital and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Ma'am, we are extremely blessed to have you with us today, and I request you to share your words of wisdom with us. Over to you, ma'am.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Yes, thank you. I think I came on time. So, yes, I missed the first session. I'm really sorry. I couldn't join. Are you able to see the screen now?
Yes, ma'am.
Is my okay, that's great. So the topic that we're going to discuss today is case history taking, and within few seconds I got an idea about the audience, in the sense I know that it can be interactive, the session can be interactive, because talking about a clinical interview without discussion is very, very difficult. Um, I think most of the participants are PG students, if I'm not wrong, or people who are working in mental health sector. So this discussion will be really helpful for all of us, I guess. We will take inputs from all of you, and I'll share my inputs too. And whenever there is problem with the internet, please stop me, because otherwise I may not know. I may keep talking, and if there is any clarifications also, you can stop me.
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
thank you. So um, what would be the objectives of this discussion, 1 hour discussion? So there are actually 4 objectives. One, we all will be able to understand the general principles of clinical interview. Two, we will be aware of the basic components of case history taking and mental status examination. And finally, we will know how important is this clinical interview in making our diagnosis and in planning the management, therapeutic management among psychological clients. Apart from that, I hope at the end of this discussion, you will have definitely some idea about how to elicit a clinical interview, um, and how to ask certain areas in detail. So these are the objectives. Okay. So I always believe that starting a session with question will be really helpful to the speaker and the participants regarding what they can expect in the session, and it's easy for me to understand my participants and their understanding. So I have set of W questions. Um, if I can get volunteers who can just answer me, may I know your inputs about what is a clinical interview? Any of you? Whatever you want, you can tell.
We ask the client about his or her background, maybe earlier diagnosis done, or family background, social background, educational background.
Very good. May I know your name?
Kshiti.
Siddhi. What are you doing?
I am a second year BA psychology student in
Very
SD Hall.
good. Super. Thanks for the input. This is one of the valid information, whatever shared by Siddhi, because this is main part of case history taking. So asking the background information about their past history, family history. Yes. So case history is overall about, clinical interview is overall about taking information from the client. So why do we need it? Any other participants?
Yeah, we need it because we could diagnosis what the patient has a problem, and then we can consult him. We can tell him, or we can understand what is his problem, and then we can discuss with him how to cure with it or cope up with it. So it will be
Very good.
helpful to him or her.
Very good. So overall, a diagnostic formulation and therapeutic planning for therapeutic management will be the ultimate goals of any clinical interview. May I know your name?
My name is Radni Sarvajna, and I am FIBA in SP
Oh,
College.
okay, that's great. Thank you. That
Yeah,
is
welcome,
one
ma'am.
of the best answers to suit this question.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. So when do we do it? Anyone else? When? I mean, when is the scope appropriate scope for clinical interview? Anyone is there?
Ma'am, can I answer again?
Yeah.
Ma'am, I feel that whenever a person feels that there's something wrong in him or her, or he is
Okay.
facing with some problems, so he
Okay.
must consult a psychiatrist,
Okay.
psychologist.
Very good. So whenever the patient is approaching you, you will definitely need a clinical. So this is clinical interview will be the beginning of any conversation that is related to catering the mental health needs of a patient. So the whole session will be talking about these three questions only. So we will talk about the major components of clinical interview. We will talk about the main aims of clinical interview. We will also talk about the application of clinical interview whenever there is a need. Okay. So, what are the major aims of clinical interview? Yes, or already, as rightly mentioned by, I'm sorry that I forgot your name, but yeah, um, there are two
Radni.
major, yes. So there are two main aims. One, um, it gives you overall biopsychosocial element of the nature of the problem that the patient has. Another one, clinical interview is the entry point for forming a patient physician relationship, because without that relationship, taking forward a therapy session with any client would be very difficult. So clinical interview is one of the major scope for any physician, any clinician, any psychologist, any social worker to have that proper relationship with the patient. So yeah, let us talk mainly about the first interview, first aim first. So one, under biopsychosocial elements, it mainly helps us in diagnosis, a proper a criteria based, it can be DSM-5 or ICD-10, a proper criteria based diagnosis can be achieved with the help of a very good clinical interview. And with the help of clinical interview, we can predict the course of the illness and the prognosis, whether there'll be we can expect some improvement or not, or to what extent we can expect improvement with this current background details of the client. So the prognosis of the disease or the condition can be concluded to some extent. There is a chance for assessing the risk factors that are related in any with any client's history, like for example a risk for suicide attempt, a risk for multiple relationship, a risk for multiple substance abuse, all those things, a criminal offense, all those things. Next is we can plan appropriate psychological evaluation. Yes, so with the help of a proper clinical interview, we can plan our psychological evaluation. We can decide which areas of the personality we need to explore, what sort of rating scales we need to use, or which sort of which projective test will be appropriate for this person. Everything will be decided based on the clinical interview. Like for example, if a patient is illiterate, you will know you cannot use a paper pencil test, or you will have other options of tests that you can think of. And finally it helps us to plan a tailor-made patient-specific treatment planning. So we know there are n number of psychological theories available, n number of therapeutic formulation available. However, little bit of customization is required in therapeutic planning based on the nature of the patient, even if we are going to follow any evidence-based therapy for that matter. So yeah, let us see the general principles. So what do you have to keep in your mind before going into a case history? So okay, first thing is the setting, the environment in which you're going to collect the history. So you need to make sure that you give enough space for the patient to talk about his issue. So if there are less, just imagine you're going to go to a person to whom you're going to share all your secrets. That is usually very difficult for any of us to do. So imagine the position of a client. So just in case if he's coming to us to share something, we need to make sure that we are giving him a proper space so that it will be easy for him to tell. So the setting with less interruption from outside environment, and you need to make sure that you're keeping your mobile phone on silence. Certain things we also need to follow before starting your clinical interview. And you need to make sure that sometimes if you're doing consultation in any hospitals, there are possibility that nurses or secretary may keep on coming inside to ask something, to take something. So if you know that you're going to take some 45 minutes of time with the patient and the issue may be sensitive, then you need to make sure that you are having a do not disturb board outside the door. So all these things are important, and you need to keep your tissues, for example, ready, because sometimes patient may break down in front of you, so you need to help them. So these are the basic things that you need to keep in mind before taking any case history. And then introduction. So once the patient comes inside, it's your responsibility to introduce yourself, so that you're initiating the conversation, and your voice and tone should make the patient feel very, very comfortable. It should not make them, there shouldn't be any dominating tone. And you need to explain the purpose of you being there and your qualifications if there is a need, and what will be happening in the next 45 minutes. And then the comfort and safety. Yes, it is related to setting too. So, we need to make them feel very comfortable. We need to make sure if they have had their food properly. So just in case if you're going to have a client at 1 p.m., you need to make sure that they've had their lunch, or you need to know whether they want to eat now, all those things. And you need to keep yourself also very comfortable. The safety, yes, you need to, the safety point and confidentiality, of course, are slightly related. So physical safety and safety for the information, whatever they are going to discuss. So you need to tell them before even starting anything. You need to definitely talk about how confidentiality is an important part of any psychologist or mental health workers ethics, and how you will never break your confidentiality unless and until there is a need. So now I would like to ask a question. When can we break confidentiality?
When there is a court case or sexual abuse, or where police can be involved, or if the client has committed any kind of crime, then and he or she is feeling guilty about it, then there is a need to break that confidentiality.
Very good, very good. Anywhere else? Very good, Shruti. So similarly,
when we feel that we as a psychologist or a psychiatrist, we need someone's approval, or we need someone's suggestion to check just what we have diagnosed is correct or not. Maybe that time
so
we
if
need
you
to
have
tell.
a supervisor, yes, so that you can tell the patient that the information will be discussed only with one supervisor, and he or she will be maintaining confidentiality. Very good.
Ma'am?
Yeah.
Ma'am, can we disclose the confidentiality if there is a threat to the society?
If there is a threat to others, if there is a threat to the patient himself, we can definitely break the confidentiality. But there is a detailed ethics given for all of us to follow in order to break confidentiality. But threat to others, threat to self is one condition. Like imagine your client has HIV positive and he doesn't want his wife to know, he or she doesn't want the spouse to know, that we cannot definitely assure them that you won't tell. So there is a need where in such a situation you can breach the confidentiality. Yes. So next is patient physician relationship. That is another thing. Yes, as we've already seen, this is the entry point for creating proper relationship with the patient, where you need to prove themselves that you are there to help them, and you will be able to help them when they give proper information, complete information about their condition. And you're not going to use this information for anything else. Then involvement of third parties. So while having a clinical interview, conducting a clinical interview, when are you going to include the other parties inside the room? Or just in case, imagine you're having a 5-year-old child with a lot of behavioral problems. Parents are bringing in the child and they're telling a lot of complaints about the child to you. With the presence of the child, what will the child feel? The child will have some conclusion. The interview with the parent will have some impact on the child's attitude towards the clinician. So you need to decide to whom you need to talk first. Okay, it is an adolescent, probably I will get enough and more information from him too, and it is important for me to win his trust too. So probably I will ask the child or the adolescent my set of questions first before involving the parent, and then I will make sure that I'll interview the parents alone. Or if there is no way, I mean, the parents are insisting upon having them in the room, you need to give proper assurance to the kids, saying you will have a separate time with them in order to take their part of what words and statements. So involvement of third parties is another thing that you need to decide, and respect and consideration. So we all know how stigma plays an important role for any of us to approach a mental health worker. Though the concept of stigma is slightly getting diluted, the impact is still present, and it is significant enough so that most of the patients are still hesitating to approach any clinician. So the respect give to the client as a person is very much important. They need to feel that self-respect. Just because they're approaching you, we cannot, just because they are of lesser age, we cannot call them in singular. Just because they're approaching us, we cannot have dominating tone. We need to have the supportive client-centered interview. Next, usage of open and closed-ended questions. So you should know when to stop, when to ask open-ended questions. So just in case if a client is hypomanic, or if the client has pressure of speech, you need to know where and all you can use closed-ended questions. And if just in case if the client doesn't want to say anything out, then we need to, most of our questions should be open-ended questions, so that we'll get enough and more information from the client. Next, patient-centered, disorder-based interview. Yes, so we need to have Rogers. You all must have read about Rogers theory. So all the concepts of Rogers theory inside your mind before you are going into a clinical interview, and we need to explain about the duration. So these are the general principles of duration. So, it doesn't mean that taking a history has got these many steps. These things will be a part of your behavior as you practice a proper clinical interview. You don't have to remember all these things. These things will come on its own as you practice, as you get more exposure in the field of mental health. So Yeah, regarding the duration, usually 45 minutes to 1 hour. You cannot have too much of conversation. Sometimes they'll have pressure of speech. They'll keep talking for 2 hours. Sometimes they'll just want, they'd have taken permission from office. They'd have thought, okay, it is a doctor consultation. Any consultation will last only for 15 minutes. So, you need to tell everything in advance. So yes, before taking case history format, we as we know there are two different formats, adults and children. But today we are going to focus on adults case history format in this presentation. So sociodemographic details is the first important component of case history. So we will ask for the name, the age. If there is a need, you will ask for the date of birth, the gender, education, occupation, marital status, and you can ask for the religion, locality, and socioeconomic status, all those things. And the source of referral is very important. Who referred the client, or the client approached you on his or her own? That needs to be recorded. And what is the reason for the referral, or just in case if the client has reached you on his own, why he has reached you, and the reliability of the information. Okay, so any inputs on how can we check the reliability of the information? We know clients give their information. Mostly they may not lie because they're talking about themselves to a counselor or psychologist. But even then, we need to check the reliability of the information given by the client. So how can we check reliability of the information given by any client in a clinical interview? Any answers? Okay. So first we will look for the consistency in the information, because in case history, in various places, a few things will be repeated. So we will see the consistency in the information, and we will corroborate the information given by the patient and his relatives, or the attendees whoever are coming along with the patient. So that is one simplest way to check the reliability. And we should also need to mention if the information, whatever you have collected in the clinical interview, is adequate or inadequate based on the information. Towards the end of the interview, you can fill this part. Okay. So the next part is the chief complaints. So it has got one important rule. The chief complaint is a major complaint for which the patient is approaching you. So you will definitely ask them what for you have approached a psychologist, what are all the difficulties do you have. So they will definitely tell a set of complaints. So you need to write their own verbatim, not any technical term. If they say that I have difficulty in sleep, you will write difficulty in falling asleep. I have problems in attending to my class or concentrating in my class, you will write the same. I have frequent fights with my spouse, you will write the same instead of writing marital conflict. So, you will look for the layman term, whatever they are telling, and you need to write it in chronological order. Which one started first, after that which symptom started, and then which symptom started, what are all the what is the duration for each symptom. So you need to mention everything separately. And towards the end of chief complaints, you need to look for predisposing factor. So what is a predisposing factor? What are all the vulnerability factor for that client to develop such a condition? So any childhood trauma or any family history, genetic and environmental vulnerability. As you know, most of you must have read diathesis stress model. So the role of stress and gene in creating mental illness in a patient. So you will look for all those vulnerability factors. So family history, previous treatment history, all those things. And precipitating factors. So there are many factors, but which one triggered this episode? Which is the point where the patient developed any of the significant symptoms. So, from childhood onwards, there is a family history of depression. So many things must be there. But at this point, after the death of my father, I developed the sleeplessness. Later, I developed sad mood. I felt lost. Later I life. So precipitating factor would be the death of the father. So factor is the factor that is just happened just before the development of the first symptom. Next is perpetuating factors. Perpetuating factors are the maintaining factors. So once I develop the symptom, what are all the factors that are maintaining my symptom? So like I have maybe alcohol dependence syndrome. My marital discard is one of the perpetuating factor. Or I lost my job because of my alcoholic behavior. But that financial strain in turn is a perpetuating factor that is triggering me to drink again and again. So these are the three important factors that you need to look for once you ask for the chief complaint. So predisposing factor, precipitating factor, and perpetuating factor. Next is mode of onset. So whether it happened abruptly or the client approached you within 2 days or within a week of the symptoms, or it is there for so long, like the client is telling you some 6 years history, 5 years history, or sometimes they'll say, okay, I have these clients. Recently I had to happen to see a client. When I asked for the starting point, she said, I don't even remember when it started. So sometimes the client will not be aware of the starting point. That is insidious onset. So you need to look for the mode of onset and the course of illness, whether it is happening continuously. Okay, I have depression for the past 2 months continuously, and there is no break, not even one day or not even few days I felt okay. Always I feel low. Or is it episodic? Okay, so I had one episode of depression 2 years ago. After that, I was all fine. I was functioning to my pre-morbid level. Now, suddenly, I had another stressor in my life, after which I developed a second episode of depression. So that is episodic. Next is fluctuating. So yes, I had symptoms of depression, but I did not give much interest as I felt okay with doing some diversion. But later, I felt I won't be able to come out of it. The symptoms are fluctuating. It's not, steady or continuous. So these are the major cause of illness that you will look for, and the progress, whether it is improving or it is worsening as the day passes, or it is the same. Okay. So these are the things that you will look along with chief complaints. Yeah. So next is history of present illness. So whatever you mentioned in the chief complaints, you will elaborate the symptoms, how it started, what is the nature of the symptom of the current episode. So, the client says that, for example, the client says that he has problems in sleep again. So you will explain the client was apparently normal until these many days ago. During then this stressor happened, followed which he developed the following symptoms gradually. Initially, he had disturbance in sleep. So whenever he went to his bed, or whenever he tried to fall asleep, he had many negative thoughts. As a result, he was not able to sleep. Or whenever he was trying to sleep, he had this fear that something will happen to him, so he could not sleep. Or this is the expression of different illness itself, different condition itself. So the client was preoccupied with his past and feeling sad. That could be an indication of depression. The client was very anxious that something will be happening to him. That could be any of the neurotic related or stress related. Client feels someone may kill him, that can be an indication of paranoid idea or any of the psychotic condition. Or if the client feels that there is no need for me to sleep because I am all energetic, that can be an indication of mania. So the way the symptoms will be sleeplessness for all the client, but the nature of the symptom explains the exact condition. So you will explain the nature of the symptom in the HUPA rather than telling the history of the patient. That is the client went to his bed at 9 o'clock and he was wearing this night clothes. He did not feel comfortable. No, not like that. But you will talk mainly about the complaint, the symptom, rather than talking about all the prefix and suffix, whatever that are happening to him in the environment. Okay. So you will talk about the nature, the frequency, the severity, the pattern of symptoms, including exacerbating and alleviating factors. So like for example, ADS case. So when did the client initiate his first drink was at the age of 18, when his friend insisted him on drinking or taking a sip of beer. Later he started to drink once in a week, but until 2 years back, where during then his mother passed away, he did not drink frequently, but afterwards he started to have alcohol every once in 2 days. Initially, he started with 250 ml. Later, it moved to how many ml. How his tolerance improved and how increased, and how he developed withdrawal symptoms. Now, what exactly is his current condition? What will happen if he doesn't drink? All those things, the frequency, severity, the pattern of development, everything you will be explaining in the HOPA. And associated disturbance, not associates, there is a typo, it is associated disturbance. So because of his problem, what are all the associated disturbance that came? So I have alcohol problem. As a result, I develop sleep disturbance, or as a result, I have problems in my occupational area, I got fired from my work, my job. So this is one of the associated disturbance. Or there is a marital conflict between me and my spouse. This is one of the associated disturbance. So I have a set of chief complaints, and I have set of related complaints because of my chief complaints. Next is my treatment history. So where do I seek treatment? Where did I seek treatment for all my complaints? Have I ever sought any treatment? If I've taken treatment, what sort of treatment? Even including spiritual history treatment, you need to take. Sometimes they'll be the caregivers will bring the patient to some pujari for all the spiritual treatment, doing some pujas. Okay, recently I happened to see a client with panic disorder. She had a few episodes of panic disorder that just started on its own during this COVID period. Then she was brought to some spiritual treatment, where she had possession attack. She believed some goddess, the soul of some goddess is there inside, and she acted as if a goddess. That happened for 3 times whenever they brought her to the puja. But the actual thing is, the client herself was very suggestible. So, like for example, if she's taking some medicine, and if someone tells her that if you take this medicine, you will develop headache, for sure she will develop headache. So, sometimes the spiritual treatment will change the color of the actual symptom. So that in order to understand that, we need to ask for even that. So only sometimes if they do not tell, you need to ask. If you have brought the child, once there was this completely psychotic girl who presented with all severe depressive symptoms. She did not talk about any of her psychotic symptoms, because she was taken to a pujari, where they had hit her and given a lot of punishment as a part of the spiritual treatment. As a result, she did not want to talk about anything. After so many weeks, she opened up about her psychotic. This is one of the aspects of treatment history. Next is negative history. So if you know your ICD-10 or DSM, based on the chief complaints, you know that you may doubt for few conditions. So you will make sure that the client doesn't have a rest of the other conditions. So because any client has, okay, I request all of you to please mute yourself. There is some disturbance. Thank you. So, any client a chance for having more than one condition, but at times they'll give importance to only one condition. So, like a client with OCD, there is a high chance that comorbid depression can be present. Sometimes we will not even know such a condition may present. There'll be uncastic traits. So, perfectionist traits. So, you need to ask for all the other things, whether you have this, and you need to rule out all the conditions, starting till personality issues, everything you need to ask every client. So that will be the part of negative history. So in negative history, you will write the client has no history of, no symptoms, no history of depressive episode, helplessness, hopelessness, suicidal ideas, hearing of voices, all those things. Okay. Next, history of past illness. Past medical and psychiatric condition you will ask for. And anyway, here the focus is psychiatric illness. So you need to, you will ask the client if he has ever visited any psychologist for similar complaints, or if he has ever had similar complaints, but he wouldn't have visited any mental health worker. So you will ask the details, you will explain everything. If it is for example, if it is a bipolar disorder, you need to form a graph. Okay, from this year to this year, these many months, there was a manic period, and then he was neutral, he was maintaining, and then there was this depression, there was this hypomania. Like that, you have to maintain the graph, you have to maintain the timeline properly. So that's about the history of past illness. Oh yeah, in history of past illness, one more thing is very important. Just in case if there was a previous episode, you will have to ask for the adherence to treatment. Okay, I had an episode of mania 2 years ago. Did I follow my medicines properly? So that I will know this time whether the patient will be following up for the therapy properly or not. Do I have to give extra motivation for this client in order to follow up properly? So this compliance to treatment can be understood by understanding the history of past illness. Next is family history. Yes, in family history, you will ask for the consanguinity between parents, their age, education, the family members, at least the 3 generation details you will collect. And you will draw a genogram. In the next slide, I have a small example of genogram, because genogram by itself is a big topic. So you will ask about all the medical and the psychiatric illness of all the generations, all the family members, whether you will definitely ask for mental illness, mental retardation, addiction, suicide, epilepsy, substance abuse, and multiple marriages. Multiple marriage meaning there is a possibility for any of the mental condition, like more than many marriages, or if someone's whereabouts are not known. Okay, I have a uncle who suddenly he got lost. We have no ideas about himself. So how come one person is lost? Did he have any history of any psychiatric condition? So we need to ask for all the things in family history. And we will assess patient's relationship with his family members, and the family structure, nature, home environment, everything. Family's traditions. Yes, for example, if you're getting a patient with anancastic traits, OCD traits, in family tradition, there is a possibility that you may get any of the anancastic personality traits. So I have OCD, my mother have OCPD traits. In one OCD case, for example, she has this habit of severe OCD with both obsession and compulsion. Even she has this checking and cleaning habit before closing any tap, or before she leaves the bathroom or a wash basin. She makes sure that she talks to the tap for 10 times in order to make sure that the tap is not leaking. So she will literally close it, check it for 3 times, and she will keep her hand under the tap to check if the water is coming or not. She'll do that for 5 times, and then she'll talk to the tap for 10 times. Okay, I hope you're not leaking. I hope you're not leaking. I hope you won't spoil my room by leaking more water. Like that, she has to talk. So when I tried to collect the family history, she said her mother used to wake up at 2 o'clock daily in order to clean the bathroom and do her puja, and clean the kitchen, and do her start her daily routine. So and mother was the one to insist the patient from childhood onwards to check the tap properly after every time. So she had all obsessive compulsive personality traits, the mother, but the patient who also has some obsessive compulsive traits later, developed obsessive compulsive disorder. So, the family tradition plays a role too. So yes, these are the main aspects of family history. This is one simple genogram. Usually, say a kind of mental illness, the patient will be indicated using filter lines. The circle is female, the square is male, and there is an indication symbol for indicating separation. There is a symbol for indicating consanguinity for between parents. That is the relationship between parents. There is a symbol for indicating death person, all those things. So even abortion, miscarriages, everything can be indicated in the genogram. This is just a model. So next to family history is the personal history. So in the personal history, we will ask the patient from the birth history till the current illness, current condition. Okay, so birth history mainly. If there is any query about the IQ of the patient, then you will definitely ask for all the details, including the prenatal, antenatal, and postnatal developmental milestones, and any behavioral problems that the child had in the when the child was young, or especially when the child started to the client as a child started to speak, started to walk, all the motor and speech development especially we'll ask. And when did he start schooling? Was there any difference between his development? Sometimes mothers may not remember the difference between whether he attained everything on time. So you will ask whether there was any significant difference between himself and his siblings. So you will try to find out, elicit all the details, and you will ask for childhood disorders. So hyperactivity, tics, nail biting, bedwetting, all the common conditions that you see in childhood. And you will ask for the home atmosphere in childhood and adolescence. So yeah, so the family history may mainly talk about the current family situation. So as a child, okay, I remember one child, when we were administering one projective test, the child said, okay, that was between two animals. The card shown to the child was two bear having a rope in their hand. So what the child told was, okay, one bear is mother, one bear is father, and they both are fighting. Towards the end, mother will win in the fight, and father will leave the home. So this was exactly happened when she was 2 years old. Now at present, the child was around some 6 or 7 years when we did the interview. So the home atmosphere at present, both the parents are there, but there was one incident of parental separation that had a severe impact on the child's mind. So home atmosphere in childhood and adolescence is very important. There was this client where the mother brought her adolescent girl with the main complaint of usage of excessive mobile phone. When asked about it, she said that, okay, first you need to, madam, first you need to ask my mother and father, because they are the ones to talk over their phone. Always when I went and interrupted, they bought me this phone. So I developed this habit. So, you will understand how it started, the pattern of development, all those things. So, and yeah, without fail, you need to ask for what sexual abuse, neglect, physical abuse, emotional neglect, everything in childhood. And you will ask about the scholastic performance, at what age they started the schooling, how was their scholastic performance, did they have friends, did the patient was interested in extracurricular activities, did he have a proper attitude towards the teachers, all those things, the college details, everything. Next is occupational history. Occupational history, one, you will find out the nature of the associated disturbance. Two, occupational history itself may indicate some sort of symptoms to you. So frequent job change may be an indication of a psychotic feature, the reason in job change, whether because of alcoholic behavior, whether there's any other personal interpersonal issues. Is it related to any of his personality problems? So the details of occupation, all the occupation, and what happened, the nature for the shift in occupation, all those things you will ask. You will also touch upon the burnout, exhaustion, and job satisfaction, all those. So psychosocial aspects too. Next is menstrual history. You will ask about menstrual cramp, first menopause, cramps, and the attitude of patient towards menstrual pain, and all the PMS details. And next is sexual history. So before asking for sexual history, you need to make sure that the patient is comfortable enough in answering you about the details of the sexual history. If not, you can take some time, build some rapport, and then ask for more details. Okay, because sometimes patient will not be comfortable, and sometimes few patients will be really having no inhibition, and they'll try to explain every other detail. So you should know where to stop. Also, you should know the purpose of taking sexual history, the sexual knowledge, and attitude towards sexual relationship, attitude towards opposite sex. All these things are important aspects, and the present sexual satisfaction. All these things should be definitely included in sexual history. Next is marital history. So in family history, you will talk mainly about all the biological relatives of the family, whereas in marital history, you will ask for the details of the spouse, kids, the attitude of the spouse towards the client's current condition. The spouse is very supportive. She is the one who brought me here. Or my spouse is not at all supportive. She told me that only if you're okay, you need to come inside the house. Otherwise, I will not live with you. So, you need to ask for all the details. So you should know whether there will be a need for family therapy in future, marital therapy in future. Next, use and abuse of alcohol. So sometimes alcohol use will not be the major condition, but it will be an indication, byproduct of any of the other conditions. So, psychosis and alcohol, for example. And the destruction of alcoholism in psychotic patients will be really different. So the use and abuse of alcohol and other substance must be asked to all the clients without fail. Even if it is a female client, it is okay to ask. So these are the important aspects of personal history. Okay, so why do we follow this order? Why? I mean, you know what is a case history. You can just ask the details. Why do we have to follow any of the, be it Mayer-Gross case history taking, be it the case history taking pattern given in a synopsis of psychiatry? Why? Mainly because we should not miss any details. Only when you follow a structured clinical interview procedure format, only when you have a protocol, you will not miss any details. So in order to make sure that we have not missed any details, we need to follow a format. Okay. So finally, the mental status examination. Please stop. I mean, let me know if I am exceeding my time.
No,
So,
ma'am, it's perfectly all right.
Yeah. Okay, fine. I may need another some 10 minutes probably. So mental status examination is like physical examination in medical field. So this is one of the important aspects of case history taking. It is mainly based on the observation of the symptom, and you will ask some question and they will report some answers. So, patient's report of his mental experience. So, yeah. So mental status examination again has got few sections. First is talking about the appearance. So, immediately after seeing, yes. So I was mentioning about a severe OCD client. She was actually a gold medalist from Anna University in one of the batches some 10 years ago. But she was working in a big company. But when she came to meet, when she came for consultation, she hardly, she was not at all looking like a gold medalist. She was in a hurry. Her face was oily. She was not very well groomed. The dress also was very casual, which was not very appropriate for the setup. Because she had such a big anxiety that this OCD will what will ruin her life, and she has to take the consultation immediately. So one morning she decided, she took some appointment over the phone, and she came immediately within half an hour for the appointment. So the appearance of the patient can tell you a lot. Sometimes they will have big earrings, new dresses, all silk sari. That may be an indication of hypomania. Sometimes they will they'll be very shabby. Sometimes they'll be very perfect. They'll come talk to you. They'll be have all the unencastic traits will be expressed sometimes in general appearance. So the general appearance, body build, dress, hygiene, grooming, the reality with surround, that is touch with surrounding, facial expression, posture. Sometimes patient will lean on your table before. Sorry. Okay. So sometimes patient will lean on your table while telling history. Sometimes patient will be really guarded, and they will sit some 2-3 feet away from you. So posture, everything will give some clues to you. You need to be really observant of all these information. And eye contact is one of the important aspects of general appearance. So whether it is drooping, whether the patient was able to maintain eye contact. Sometimes they will have eye contact, but it will not be consistent. For example, if the client has any poor social skills, or the client has symptoms of cluster B personality traits, like anxious avoidant traits, they may not look into your eyes properly. They'll keep looking somewhere else in the room instead of looking into your eyes. So whether he maintained the eye contact or not, that is another important part. Okay, I've taken this example from CTP, comprehensive textbook of psychiatry, which is talking about the appearance. So patient appeared, her stated age, was dressed eccentrically and was poorly groomed. She seemed tense, distracted, difficult to structure, and was otherwise cooperative with the interview. This is just an example. Next is attitude, whether the patient was cooperative, attentive, evasive, that is the patient was able to give answers directly to all the asked questions, or he or she was guarded. Some in the beginning of the interview should have given some set of complaints. Towards the end, when you try to reconfirm the same, she may say, no, I am normal. Sometimes they'll be guarded, they'll be suspicious, hostile sometimes. They'll be over familiar. Sometimes they'll buy gifts and all to you. I had a class with a psychiatrist when I was doing my MSc. The psychiatrist had a hypomanic case. So whenever he is in hypomania phase, definitely he'll get all costly gifts. That's what the psychiatrist told us. So, sometimes we'll have all such things that will be expressed in the attitude of the patient towards the examiner. I had a client where initially the client was a paranoid schizophrenia client. The first day when I interviewed, she was in the IP. So the first day when I interviewed, she was all happy. She offered me food. She was very cooperative. But the third day when I went to talk to her, she was all guarded and she did not talk to me. When I probed further, she told me that I know you were complaining to the nurse about me. The other day when I went and met the nurse for recording my clinical notes, session notes, she thought I was complaining and writing some complaint. So she became very guarded. So sometimes initially they'll be cooperative, later they may not be. Or sometimes initially they'll be really hesitant. As they talk to us, they'll be very cooperative. All these things should be recorded. And rapport, whether you were able to build the rapport or not. Next is the patient's motor behavior. Yeah, whether the patient was fidgeting, whether the patient was able to sit properly, whether the patient kept on adjusting the dress. So these are all motor behavior. Whether sometimes they'll be always in a hurry. They will show as if they are in a hurry. All type A personality traits, or anancastic personality traits. abnormal posture, catatonic posture features. So they'll be having one posture for extended period of time. Sometimes they'll be having hallucinatory behavior. Sometimes they'll be like, okay, stop, I'm hearing some voice, I need to listen to my voice, wait. Sometimes they'll say, okay, wait, I need to talk to the god first before talking to you. So all the hallucinatory behavior may come up, and involuntary tremors, everything. So next is speech. We will talk about the intensity of the speech, the tone, the quality, the loudness, prosody, everything. So, sometimes they will maintain the prosody, the ups and downs in the speech. Hi, how are you? Everything they'll be able to say. Sometimes whatever question we will ask, they'll give maintain a monotonous tone, like, yeah, madam, I'm fine. How are you? Like that. Sometimes they will, before even we finish the question, they will give the answer. Okay, what did you have for dinner? They will not even let us finish the question. They will give the answer, the reaction time. Sometimes even after finishing the question, we'll be waiting for the answers. We need to ask them again. So, that is about the reaction time, speed, the ease of speech, coherence between the speech statements and the goal direction. All those things we need to record. We need to have a, whatever you are going to record, we need to have a verbatim for that. If you're talking about the coherence, you need to have a record for that. So, okay, next part is thought. This is one of the important parts, that these things may look different for you now, but if you read it once, and as you pursue your higher studies, you will be able to understand all the concepts of of the formal thought disorder. So in thought, we will mainly, okay, why do we have to assess the thought, or how do we assess the thought? Based on the speech of the patient and whatever complaints he or she is reporting. So first two things are stream and form of thought, that are talking about the connectivity of the between the statements, and how, to what extent that is meaningful to the examiner, to what extent it is conveying the meaning to the examiner. Where you will talk about the spontaneity, acceleration, whether the patient had pressured speech, flight of ideas. So he'll talk about something and something and something, he'll connect, take cues from the environment, talk different statements. And poverty of speech, circumstantiality. Okay, you ask one question, they'll never give, they'll give answer towards saying, okay, what did you have for breakfast? They'll say that I started from my home, I went to the signal where there was a hotel. Like that, they'll have different answers towards saying, they'll say, I had idli. Tangentiality, perseveration, tangentiality. These are the different aspects of thought disorder. Perseveration, repeating the same thing. Thought blocking, suddenly there'll be a block. Tangentiality, they'll present as if they'll give the answer, but they won't give the answer. What do you like? They may say, from childhood onwards, I have fond for South Indian food. I like to cook, but they won't say what food they like actually. So, and loosening of association, derailment, neologism, producing one new word which is not at all there, which makes a lot of meaning to the patient. Desultory thinking, out of the blue, suddenly they'll talk some sentence, and the sentence will be meaningful, but that will not be very appropriate for the question whatever you asked. Next is the possession of thought. Here you will write about all the obsessions, repeated thoughts, thought alienation. Like, for example, my thought are not mine, someone is inserting thoughts inside me, or someone is trying to take away few of my thoughts, or some chip inside me so that they can record all my thoughts, all those things. And the content is all the preoccupations of the patient. It can be worry, fear, guilt, all the types of delusions, persecution, that is somebody's harassing me, somebody's accusing me, grandeur, I am the god, I have superpowers, hypochondriasis, I have some supernatural, I have some severe health issues in my body, worthlessness, helplessness, hopelessness, guilt, nihilism, end of world feeling, infidelity, my spouse is not truthful to me, all these things. So all overvalued ideas and other parts of the other types of delusions. So these are the major contents of thought. So overall, in thought, you will talk about the spontaneity of the the nature of the thought, the coherence of the thought, and how meaningful it is, or if it is not meaningful, and what sort of pathology did it have. And the mood has got two parts: subjective mood and objective. So subjective mood is, you will ask the patient how did he feel. Objectively, how did he look. He may say, I feel sad. Did he look actually sad? So you will just try to corroborate the information. And under perceptual disorder, you will have hallucinations, details of hallucinations, whether there was a thought echo, I'm hearing my own thought, or second person hallucination, someone is talking to me, or third person hallucination, I have a group of a few voices talking among themselves. Illusions, depersonalizations, all this depersonalization, derealization, stress related, dissociative conditions. So as you do your course, you will know what it is. If you've done your abnormal psychology, psychopathology, you may have some idea about it. Next is the cognitive functions. You will test for patient's attention, concentration. You will give some simple calculations, serial subtraction. The client has to tell the subtraction of sevens in 100. So 93, 86, like that. He has to tell. Or 40 minus 3, or month in reverse order, days of week in reverse order, 20 to 1, all these things. Orientation, you will ask for the time, place, person, and then the situation, sense of passage of time. Yeah, these are all direct questions that you can ask. And memory, you will assess three types of memory: immediate memory, recent memory, remote memory. And for immediate memory, you will give few digits forward and few digits backward. You will ask the patient to repeat. For recent, you will give 3 objects and ask the patient to repeat after a few minutes 3 unrelated objects or 5 unrelated objects. Remote memory, all childhood, date of birth, date of marriage, all those things. Okay. So the next section is abstractability. To what extent the client's thinking is conceptual. The client has higher level of thinking. You will give some proverb and ask for the meaning. You will see if the patient is able to understand it or not. If the patient is able to tell the same answer, or like for example, okay, so if I can get some volunteers here, what is the difference between mango and banana? What is the similarity between mango and banana? Any replies?
It's a fruit.
Both are fruits. Very good. Anything else?
Both have yellow color.
Very good.
Both are sweet.
Superb. So we have 3 levels of answer here. There are 3 levels of abstractability: concrete level, functional level, and conceptual level. Concrete is when you said both are yellow, it is very evident. Immediately after seeing, both are yellow. So that is the basic level. Next is functional level. That is both are sweet, both are eatables. That is talking about the function of the object, whatever you presented. Conceptual is higher order level. Both are fruits. Okay. Then you will ask about general information. You will ask about the name of the country, name of the capital, CM, PM, for common rivers, common cities, all those things. For naming 5 continents, all those things. Then based on all these things, and you will give some calculation test, you will find out you will assume the intelligence of the patient. Okay, based on all these things, the intelligence seems to be okay, average, adequate, or based on all these things, the intelligence seems to be inadequate. Okay, then test judgment. Judgment has got 3 parts: test, social, and personal judgment. So you will ask the patient what will he do if there is a fire in the next door neighbor's house, if he's giving appropriate answer or not. Similarly, what will he do while attending a marriage? And in order to ask the personal judgment, you will ask the client about his personal plans. What is your plan? So the client has to tell you that I will take treatment, I'll get ready, I'll get better, and I'll go for job. So based on all these things, you will finally conclude the insight of the patient. So that is the final part of case history and MSc. So to what extent the client has awareness about his own condition. It ranges from complete denial to super insight, a true emotional insight. So just you will ask him certain things. What is the reason behind your illness? So the patient has to, based on the answer the patient gives you, and based on your entire clinical interview, you will decide the insight of the patient. So this is just a example of mental status examination. The final part is case summary. So you will summarize all the important aspects of the case, and you will formulate a write a diagnostic formulation where you will give importance to only the symptoms and the places that are directly related to your diagnosis. You will not have all the history in diagnostic formulation. Diagnostic formulation will be crisp and it will be to the point. End of diagnostic formulation will give you a provisional diagnosis of the case. Based on that, you will write your impression. You will also, you will either follow your ICD-10 or DSM-5 or both. So this is about clinical interview. Now the questions time. I know it was very lengthy. I had to do a lot of talking, but if there is any question, I'm happy to answer.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Please.
How many sessions does it take to make the final diagnosis or the assessment of MSc?
Okay. So usually the MSc, okay, one thing is, I forgot to mention this. It's good that you asked this question. So mental status examination will be done repeatedly, not just for once. So initially you will take case history and MSc. Within 1 or 2 sessions you can finish both. But once you give some therapy, after some time you can again repeat your MSc. So it's not that you need to do one MSc only once. So maximum 1 or 2 sessions, mostly you can finish your case history and MSc. And final formulation, sometimes you will, based on case history and MSc, you will have your provisional diagnosis. In order to have your final formulation, if there is any gaps in the history, you need to go for psychological assessment. That may take some 2-3 sessions again. So overall, some 3 sessions, 4 sessions, you can have your final diagnosis if the case is really complicated. Otherwise, yeah, maximum 2-3 sessions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other question? Suggestions, comments, your experience, anything can be shared here.
I had a question.
Yes.
Like I want to do clinical psychology and all, but so I asked my seniors that how is it like, because I was having no idea about it before. So
Okay.
they were like, it is a bit I mean emotional, that you have to be strong because your clients are going to be they are going to be in some problem of emotions, and also you have to control yourself, you have to be stable. So if you can do that, then you can handle those things. Because I even asked my relative, she was into clinical psychology, but then she was like, no, now I am not able to handle this, so I will now switch to industrial psychology. So is it that hard, or it depends on person to person?
Okay. It is definitely not hard, but it requires a good clinical skill. It's not that you need to control your emotion, no, but it requires our personality can be definitely stopped from interfering in the profession. But it requires some clinical skill. You should know when to stop the client. You should know, I mean, sometimes if you're too emotional, but all these clinical skills you will learn over the period of time. In the first session, definitely you won't learn. I remember once in the first or second year of my BSc, when I went for posting to some place, that patient had hypomania, but I was not aware of hypomania at that time. At that point of some 15 years ago, at that time we did not have enough and more exposure like this too. So the client told me that I was the one to I have done a lot of achievements. I have made a world record and all. I literally believed everything, and I was very happy that I made such a good genius client and all. But later I came to know that that was all a part of his mania. You know, initially we will be like that, but as we get see more clients, as we read more about the subject, we will develop. We most of us have a better scope for developing proper clinical skills that is required.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Ma'am, even I had a similar question, like on that same line, that when there is like first sessions, when we become like we are currently, if I am a clinical psychologist, I have become recently, and I've just started my practice very recently. So if there first client comes in and I feel consciousness, sudden anxiety, so how to cope with that?
Cope with that. One thing, before having your clinical psychology practice, you will have 2 years of MPhil training. That will be really, really giving you enough and more exposure on how to deal with it. You will have your own clinical viva, you will have your own supervised sessions, psychological assessment, everything. So, 2 years of MPhil program in clinical psychology is mainly for making mistakes and learn a lot of clinical skills. And later, uh, when you by the end of the program, MPhil program, you will know how to handle most of the clients. Even though you look very blank, sometimes you'll be like, okay, did I actually complete my course? Have I already studied 7 years of psychology? What did I even know in that? You will have a big question marks in your mind. But when you go practice, if you have enough subject knowledge and little bit of supervised clinical training, definitely you will know how to handle a client. They'll say this, sometimes when you're teaching a student, if you do not know something, you can always tell them, I'll refer and get back to you. Similarly, when you see any client, if you feel that you have no expertise in that area, it is always your responsibility to increase your skill, or either to refer that client to someone else. So I'm not good at sexual therapy, then I need to either learn it or refer such clients to others. The MPhil training will give you enough and more confidence in handling your cases, definitely independently. Most of you can do it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
I also have a doubt. Like, I want to do child psychology and psychotherapy because I can't differentiate with that, choose one of them. So, is it
Okay.
possible to do both of them, child psychology and psychotherapy, and how to do that?
Okay. So what are you studying now?
I'm studying SYBA psychology.
Okay. So you can, I don't think there is any master's program for psychotherapy alone. Child psychology, I don't know if we have MSc in child psychology, but you can go for MSc in clinical psychology probably, and MPhil in clinical psychology, because clinical psychology is one subject which covers both the disorders of childhood uh, issues, and as well as the psychotherapy. So probably this would be one of the options.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am. Anything else?
Anyone else?
Ma'am, hello.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask what is the scope for forensic psychology in India?
Sorry, forensic psychology.
Yes, ma'am.
There is a lot of scope. We have a MSc program and MPhil program happening in Ahmedabad, I guess. So recently also one of the students got interview from one of the juvenile department. Their preference was forensic psychology. Definitely there is an increasing scope for forensic psychology nowadays. And you need to read the literatures, the articles of a few professors like Professor Vaya, etc., who are all experts in forensic area. So that will give you more guidance. Definitely there is a scope.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am, you talked about when client just doesn't stop and just want to talk. So how do we come to know that now we have to stop them, and how do we do that?
Okay. So how do you come to know that we need to stop? One simplest way is the time they're taking for each question. So just in case if they're going to take some 5 minutes for each question that you're going to ask, it will be really, very difficult for you to complete your case history on time, and that will not serve the purpose too. So your watch is first indicator that you need to stop. And how do you do it? You will okay, if mostly the client who talks more will take certain things, in a sportive way. Either they'll be hypomanic, or they'll have a lot of positive things to, like anxiety related things to tell. Maybe a case of OCD, they'll make sure that they have told all their complaints. They'll make sure that they need to tell everything completely along with the situational background. They'll not have this understanding that, okay, the clinician will have understanding about my symptom. No. So sometimes he'll keep on talking. So they most of them will take, if you tell them that I asked only this question, probably this we will discuss later in the next session, or like that you can tell something. Or you can even after telling that repeatedly, they had this tendency to talk, you can tell them that we need to set some rules for the session. When I ask you a question, you are not supposed to interrupt. Whenever you are talking, whenever I say stop, you need to stop. Like that, you can have some ground rules for your session, and you can handle it like that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am.
Anyone else, or shall we go ahead? Yeah, okay. I think there are no questions. So,
Okay.
yeah, thank you so much, ma'am, for telling this. Like in details, we really didn't know about this. So, yeah, thank you so much. And it was not that lengthy, and it was interesting. So, it didn't feel that much.
Okay. So thank you so much. I had the doubt mainly because I heard few of the participants saying they are doing their BSc, so probably for them it is too much of information at times. So without they having basics, I thought of having MSc students as my participants. So yeah, but I did not expect such a cooperation from most of you. I never expected that I'll have answers when I ask question in the middle of the session. I have this difficulty in having online session or online class. I have this feeling that I'm just talking to a computer. So we are not getting to see anyone. At least we need to hear some voices. Otherwise, it's like I'm talking to a computer. So that was a very cooperative, active participation from all of you. Thank you so much.